Look at your thermostat. Whatever number it shows right now, you set it once, walked away, and never thought about it again. But that number represents something your ancestors would have found impossible to believe. Not because they had never been warm, but because for them, warmth was not a setting, it was a war. Every single winter for 300,000 years, every human who ever lived before you fought the same enemy. No walls, no insulation, no heating system, just frozen ground, animal bones, and a cold so complete it would drop a modern human before sunrise. So how did they not just survive it? How did they master it? The answer is not what you have been told. And once you understand it, you will never look at your home the same way again. First, understand what the cold actually was. We are not talking about the chill you feel walking to your car. We are talking about the Eurasian steppe in deep winter, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind that does not just lower your body temperature, it strips it. Exposed skin begins to die within minutes. Breathing becomes painful. A modern human dropped into those conditions without preparation would be dead long before the next sunrise. The image we have been given is always the same. Shivering figures huddled around a dying fire, barely making it through the night. That image is wrong. What archaeology actually found was something far more surprising. Your ancestors were engineers. Here is the first thing the history books got wrong. They mostly did not live in caves. At Kostroma in Russia, dating back 800,000 years, researchers uncovered circular depressions dug into the earth, up to 8 feet deep, 12 feet across. Tool marks in the soil confirmed these were not natural formations. They were deliberately excavated to those exact measurements. Why that depth specifically? Because at 6 to 8 feet below the surface, the ground temperature holds 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the air above. Your ancestors did not fight the cold. They went underneath it. But the real sophistication came later. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, 26,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered winter shelters built with walls of multiple distinct layers, each one serving a precise thermal function. The innermost layer was animal hide, fur facing inward, trapping warm air directly against bodies. Outside that, packed dried grass and moss, pulling moisture away from the inner surface. The outermost layer was woven reed and bark, wind-resistant, but breathable enough to release moisture before it could freeze and destroy the structure from within. This was not guesswork. This was layered thermal engineering, the exact same principle behind the insulation inside your walls right now. Modern construction uses vapor barriers, insulating foam, and weatherproofing membranes. Your Ice Age ancestors used hide, moss, and bark. The materials were different. The physics were identical. Now here is where it becomes extraordinary. In Ukraine, at sites called Mazirek and Kostenki, archaeologists found something that stopped them completely when they first saw it. Not windbreaks, not lean-tos, houses. Fully engineered buildings constructed entirely from the bones of woolly mammoths. Mammoth skulls, each one weighing over 200 pounds, arranged as foundation blocks. Curved tusks bent into dome-shaped frameworks. Hundreds of smaller bones packed into the gaps for structural support. The entire structure then covered in layers of stitched mammoth hide, thick enough to block wind, shaped precisely enough to shed snow load. That is not survival instinct. That is architecture. Experimental reconstructions of these structures confirmed what the archaeology suggested. A properly assembled mammoth bone house could hold interior temperatures 40 to 50 degrees warmer than the outside air, using only modest fires. Modern Arctic shelters with industrial insulation and electric heating systems often perform no better. Stone Age builders using bones, hide, and stone tools matched the thermal performance of modern Arctic engineering. But none of it worked without fire. And inside these structures, fire was not simply warmth. It was the entire operating system of winter life. The heating layout inside mammoth bone houses was deliberate. A central hearth handled primary heat. Smaller secondary hearths sat around the perimeter, creating designated warm zones for specific tasks. Food preparation in one area, tool work in another. Infants and the elderly positioned nearest to the hottest points. The layout was not random. It was planned. Out on the treeless steppe, wood was not always available. So your ancestors developed alternative fuels. Dried mammoth dung. Bone, processed specifically to maximize burn efficiency. Chemical analysis of hearth residues has confirmed these fuels were deliberately prepared, not simply thrown onto a fire, but engineered for specific and consistent heat outputs. They were not burning whatever they found. They were managing fuel as a resource. And then there was ventilation. This is the detail that genuinely impresses modern Arctic engineers. In any enclosed shelter, moisture from breathing and cooking accumulates. In sub-zero temperatures, that moisture freezes. The structure fails from the inside out. Archaeological evidence at Kostenki shows carefully designed airflow systems built directly into the structures. Small openings near ground level drew in fresh, cold air. Larger openings near the apex allowed warm, moisture-laden air to exhaust upward and out. Passive ventilation, engineered into a building made of bones 20,000 years ago. Here is the part almost no documentary covers. What happened inside these shelters after dark. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors did not sleep the way you sleep. They slept in 2 phases, 4 hours of deep sleep, then a wakeful period of 1 to 2 hours, then 4 more hours until dawn. This was not a disorder. This was the default, documented across dozens of historical cultures. Confirmed in 1992 when psychiatrist Thomas Wehr removed all artificial light from a group of volunteers for 1 month. Every single participant automatically returned to the same 2-phase pattern. No instruction, no suggestion. Their bodies simply remembered. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years living with the Jew/Honsi Bushmen of the Kalahari, one of the last communities on Earth still living close to the original human pattern. She found that nighttime conversation was categorically different from what happened during the day. Daytime talk was 80% practical. Logistics, hunting, resources. But at night, around the fire, 81% of conversation was stories, myths, distant people, adventures. The campfire was the original theater, the original classroom, the original place where a species learned to imagine things that did not yet exist. The famous Venus figurines found at Paleolithic sites. Most were recovered from winter shelter contexts. The cave paintings we associate with this era. Many were created during the long months of winter confinement, by firelight, in bone houses, while the steppe outside was locked solid in ice. The art that defined our species was not made in summer warmth. It was made in the dark, in the cold, with fire as the only light. Building a mammoth bone house required 2 to 3 weeks of intensive labor by 8 to 10 adults, which means construction had to begin in late summer or early autumn, before conditions made outdoor work impossible. Analysis of tool, wear patterns, and seasonal indicators confirms this. These were not reactive builders responding to the first freeze. They were forward planners carrying seasonal calendars in their heads months before winter arrived. Food storage operated on the same principle. In permafrost regions, underground chambers connected to winter shelters by short tunnels functioned as natural freezers. Meat stayed frozen and accessible throughout the entire winter season, even during the worst storms. Clothing followed the same composite logic as the shelters. Multiple layers of different animal hides, each chosen for a specific thermal property. Wolf, fur, fox, Arctic hare. The innermost layer trapped warm air. The outer layer deflected wind and moisture. The same physics as a modern winter jacket, developed from pure necessity 25,000 years before Gore-Tex existed. And when damage occurred, which it did regularly, it was repaired immediately. Archaeological evidence shows continuous maintenance throughout winter seasons. Broken bones replaced, hide coverings patched, insulation refreshed. This was not a structure they built and hoped would last. It was a living system they actively managed every single day. At the end of the Ice Age, as climates warmed and forests expanded, this entire body of knowledge was set aside. Not lost to catastrophe, not destroyed, simply made unnecessary, generation by generation, until it was gone. Then something interesting happened. Modern Arctic engineers began studying Paleolithic shelter remains and found themselves genuinely surprised. Military Arctic training programs now teach shelter-building methods derived directly from archaeological reconstructions of these 20,000-year-old designs. Disaster relief organizations have adapted these techniques for emergency construction in extreme environments. We abandoned the knowledge, then spent a century rediscovering it with modern science, and found that our ancestors had already solved it perfectly, with bones and stone tools. Go back to your thermostat. The number on it represents a temperature your ancestors would have considered miraculous. Not because warmth was beyond them. They achieved warmth in conditions far more extreme than anything you will ever face. But because for them, every warm night required weeks of preparation, months of planning, continuous physical labor, and a precision of engineering knowledge where a single mistake could mean a family dead before morning. The stories you tell your children at night are the direct descendants of the myths spoken by firelight in bone houses on a frozen steppe. You did not invent warmth. You inherited it from the most resourceful engineers who ever lived, who had nothing but cold, time, and the absolute refusal to stop. The next time the cold arrives and you reach for that thermostat without thinking, remember what it actually cost to get there, and understand, maybe for the first time, how extraordinary it is to simply be warm.